Hey guys, and welcome to part 3 of the Dead by Daylight weapons series. I hope you've been enjoying it so far. I know I have. As you saw from the intro, today's weapon is the Hillbilly's sledgehammer. For those of you that play the game, I know Hillbilly is definitely more recognizable for having a chainsaw, but technically his primary weapon is the hammer. I also didn't really want to make a chainsaw, so we're making a hammer instead. I also thought this would be super great for people that are just looking to make something simple and just want some alternative techniques. It also had a ton of texture, which if anybody knows anything about me, I love the textures. I just love them. As I mentioned in the previous video for this series, extra big thank you to Coscom Cosplay Supplies for sponsoring the rest of this series. They provided most of the materials to put together all the weapons I'm going to be making, so be sure to check them out, show them some love because they're totally awesome. Halloween is coming, so if you need any last minute supplies to throw together your last minute costume, they're definitely the place to go, so check them out. Do it. Also, if you totally want to see me mess this up, like come within inches of permanently ruining it, like definitely stay tuned because I'm going to show you how I ruined it and how I fixed it and how you probably can't even tell. So yeah, let's get into it. So as usual, first up is the pattern. This one includes a front view and both side views so you can see the scale and placement of all the little extra pieces. You can find a link for this pattern in the description below. Once you have all three put together, then it's time to chop them up again. For now, you'll just need a side view of the head and the handle. For this project, I wanted to find out just how sturdy this EVA 60 from Coscom Cosplay Supplies really is. So I'll be making this entire hammer out of foam. No hollow areas, no PVC reinforcements, nothing. For proper scale, I used 10 pieces of 10mm EVA 60 for the head and 5 for the handle. If you're looking to be more economical, save on materials, etc., you can totally hollow out areas of this, or you can add PVC to the handle. This will save you on weight and cost, but again, I really wanted to see if this stuff could self-support for real. Since I'll be using my bandsaw to trim these big foam hunks down, I'm just rough cutting them before gluing them with contact cement. You can easily cut all of these pieces individually with a knife and then glue, but if you do this, make sure you cut the pieces a little large to leave room to sand back down again if they don't exactly match up. For the head of the hammer, I only temporarily glued these pieces with a few dabs of contact cement before trimming with the bandsaw. And this foam pile was so thick, it actually didn't fit in my bandsaw. I had to do it in 2 separate pieces. Now the reason I only spot glued this is so it'd be easy for me to pop them apart again and cut out the slot for the handle. Cause this baby's all foam, no fancy connectors, just one piece of foam wedged into the other. But the weight of it is so satisfying. Now to add some shape. I transferred the bevel lines using my pattern and then started carving the rough shapes with a box cutter. Once I cut down the bulk of the material, I could take it over to my oscillating belt sander to smooth down the edges. And if you don't have a big sander, a Dremel does the job just fine. Once I'm happy with the shape, I can go back in with the stone bit on the Dremel to smooth out the rough sanded areas. I also use this same bit to add some texture. What's a hammer without a hammered finish? For the handle, I used the pattern to mark the taper, and then cut this down on the bandsaw as well. For the wood texturing, I went in with my trusty wood burning tool and went totally crazy. Wood texturing is super fun, so long as you bear in mind that it's not supposed to be perfect. Stay loose and let it be as natural as possible. If you find during this process that it's not carving as well, you can remedy this by scraping the foam gunk off the tip. You can do this while it's still hot, but be super careful because it's freaking hot. And if this doesn't fix it, then you're probably like me and you bumped the temperature dial while you were working and it's simply not hot enough. But once it's working for you, you can really achieve some super cool textures. Now that the base is done, it's time to start making the accent pieces. While the pattern is good for getting the correct size and shapes, it's good to keep references handy to check the material, the wood grain direction, and other details like that. For all of the extra wood bits, I saved the pieces I trimmed off of the handle since they're nice and tapered. And I also have some other salvaged chunks of EVA 60. I left some extra material on some of these so that I had a little freedom to move them around if necessary. Then I textured these the same way I did the head and the handle. For the hardware, I used some of my Coscom foam clay in a silicone mold I made of various screw heads and such. They sell lots of molds for foam clay like this if you're not currently making molds of your own. Or you could just as easily cut little hexagons. For the tiny nails or pins, I'm not quite sure what they are, I just hole punched some little foam circles out of 2mm EVA foam. When I cut out the patterns for the small pieces, I was careful to leave the rest intact so that I could use it for placement. Work smarter, not harder. For all of these small pieces, I use mostly Barge contact cement or super glue. But for attaching the head and handle, I went in with some fancy gap-filling super glue since the fit was too tight for anything else. The last step for the foam work is some touch-ups. For the larger gaps around the handle, I used foam clay, and then for smaller little seam lines, I just used quick seal. And once it was all dry, I gave the whole piece a final sanding with fine grit sandpaper. For the sealing, I coated all the metal areas with 3 thick coats of Flex Bond to make sure all of the seams were good and hidden. The regular consistency out of the bottle is plenty thick enough. I just didn't water it down at all like I normally would. After that, the whole thing got 3 coats of Plastidip on top. Now for the paint. I wanted to approach this wood handle differently than I did my Huntress axe, so I wanted to build up the color in layers, starting with the darkest. I thinned this paint quite a bit to make sure this color got into all the nooks and crannies. While the base coat dried, I wanted to test out a new silver paint option. For the Huntress axe, I used this plain old no-name brand silver acrylic. For the katana, I used this airbrush silver paint, but I was very interested to see how this new Plaid Effects metallic silver held up. After only 1 coat, it looks pretty eh. But after building up a few more coats, it actually looks really cool. The shine is pretty awesome. Now back to the wood. Next, I went in with a much lighter paint mixture. It's not the perfect color yet, but this process is all about layers. I started with 1 dry brushed coating over the whole thing. Dry brushing only hits the high points, leaving nice dark shadows in the cracks. I then went in with lots of variations of the same colors to make different tones for the accent wood bits. While I was doing that, I somehow took a chunk out of my new silver paint, and I was kind of perplexed as to how that happened. So I had to investigate further to ensure this silver paint was going to work. I made some samples, one with Plastidip and the other Flex Bond, and then 3 coats of the Plaid Effects paint on top. And I made sure to recoat after an hour as the bottle instructed. Huh, it's totally fine. Okay, anyway, the paint is obviously fine, so I went ahead and base coated the rest of the metal. Now it's time for the washing. Using brown washes over the wood or the metal surfaces adds a nice bit of grime and extra dimension. Okay, so I fluffed up the silver paint again. Like what? The heck am I doing wrong? And then I realized, when adding the washes over top of the silver paint, it totally uncured the paint to the point it would wipe right off. Oops. Easy fix though. You can either let the paint cure longer before applying water, or add a layer of clear coat between the paint and the washes. Now the paint is fully protected. Once I added the clear coat to the whole thing, I loved the finish of the metal parts, but I felt the wood was a little too shiny, so I went back in with some fine sandpaper, and after that some matte varnish to differentiate the 2 textures. The final bit of paint detail is some Sharpie around the metal edges. This just adds some extra shine in all the right places. Now for the handle wrapping. I could have used thin EVA foam, but in the pictures this wrapping looks like super thin leather, and I just happen to have this leftover brown pleather spandex stuff. The color is great, but it's a little too pretty, so I sanded the crap out of it, then smeared some paint on it, added a few wrinkles, and voila! Quick and dirty fabric distressing. And now for the blood. Why did I have to get creative? So as you can see, I did a whole bunch of tests to see if I could find a better blood mixture. Something that was really gonna look like blood. Something more transparent and glossy. I tried a lot of products and tried a lot of different ratios, and I thought I had found the winner. In fact, I was so confident in my half-dried sample that I smeared it all over my beautiful hammer. And it looked amazing. Look at it. It's beautiful. But it was all a trap. What I did not realize is that this mixture, for reasons I cannot fathom, dried with a metallic green shine that is so obnoxious it literally looks like an oil spill when the light hits it. Cue internal panic. So I did what any sane person would do, because when life gives you blood,
demand more.
But this time go with the tried and true paint blood that won't give you a heart attack because it's freaking green. Anyway, so the blood on this one isn't my favorite, obviously, and I ended up covering a lot of my detail with a lot of extra blood. But I'm still super happy with the final result. And you can barely tell that in some spots it looks like I painted it with gasoline. But in all seriousness, don't panic. There are easy ways to cover every mistake. I took it for what it was. I knew I couldn't remove it. There was nothing I could do about that. So the easiest solution was to just work it into the design and add an opaque blood over top of it that would hide the shine. So that about wraps it up, guys. I hope you enjoyed this bumpy ride of a tutorial. This went so well, like, to start out, and then all of a sudden just right turn straight into a wall. But, you know, that happens. That's totally normal. I feel like a lot of tutorial makers don't show the nitty-gritty and the mess and the ruined things, but I really wanted you to know that I made a big mistake that I had no way of accounting for, and it happens, and it's okay. And there are ways to cover it up and fix it and make it add to your design. So I hope seeing that side of things was helpful. I hope the tutorial in general was helpful, and I hope you're enjoying this series because I know I'm having a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, be sure to let me know in the comments. Send me a message, whatever you gotta do. I am always here to help. I know everybody's probably heading into Halloween costume crunch time if you're still having Halloween wherever you live. And once again, huge thank you to Coscom Cosplay Supplies for supplying the materials to make this. I am in love with their high density EVA 60 foam. I can't get over this. Like, this has nothing in it. And I can wallop you nice and hard for not wearing your mask within 6 feet of my person. The huge blood mess that I went through for this project definitely inspired me, so I'm hoping to put together a video, like a mini video to go with this series, specifically on permanent blood options, because I couldn't find much information on this. I did a lot of looking, specifically because I was doing experiments for this prop, but like, there's not enough. Like, it's all like the stuff that you buy at the Halloween store or corn syrup, but it's very temporary. Like, I want something besides paint that I can bloody up a prop and know it's gonna stay that way and not do crazy things like turn my props metallic green. So be sure to look for that video. But until then, stay tuned for awesome.